Okay, so you know how sometimes you just gotta like hit the reset button? Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today. We're looking at this concept called upside down training from this guy, Vince DelMonte. You might have heard of him.
Yeah, definitely. He's pretty famous for like transforming his own physique. Gained something like 41 pounds of muscle in just 6 months. Went on to do some pretty big things in the fitness world, became a trainer, did some fitness modeling, won a few competitions too, I think.
Right, so we're not just dealing with some random internet guru here. This is a guy who knows his stuff and he's had success both personally and with helping others. So
Exactly.
that's what makes this deep dive, I think, extra interesting because instead of jumping right into like, okay, here's how to get bigger biceps or whatever,
Right.
this upside down training thing, it's all about this like initial phase in his program.
Yeah, the no-nonsense muscle building program. It's really about laying the groundwork first, like building a strong foundation.
Foundation, yeah. Okay, so the core idea here is, well, he says you should spend at least like 4 weeks, maybe even a little more, really focused on a few key things. It's like a pre-training assessment almost. First, you've got to figure out where your muscle weaknesses are. And I'm not just talking about like, oh, my legs are kind of weak. I mean like real imbalances between your right and left side.
And then minimizing those weaknesses.
Exactly. So it's like evening out any strength differences so you're not, compensating on one side and just generally preparing your body for the heavier lifting that's going to come later.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Like giving your body a tune-up. Like you would do with your car before a big road trip. Just making sure everything's running smoothly before you start really pushing it.
Right. Tune up. I like that analogy. And, it's the kind of prep work that a lot of people skip over because they're so focused on seeing results,
Oh, totally. Instant gratification.
Yeah, fast, fast, fast.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, if you don't have a solid foundation, you're just setting yourself up for injuries down the line.
100%. So he calls it upside down training, which I gotta say, the first time I saw that, I was like, what? What does that even mean? But it makes sense when you think about it. You're literally flipping the script on how people usually approach building muscle.
Right, like typically people jump right into the big lifts. Bench press, squats, deadlifts. And, those are important exercises, but...
Yeah, but not if you're not ready for them.
Exactly. This phase, it's all about getting ready. I've even heard it called a bunch of other things. Corrective training phase, preparatory training phase. Some people call it the control and stability phase, but upside down training, I think that really captures the essence of it. Like you're addressing your weaknesses first, and then you can build on that solid base.
Yeah. So he lays out 7 key priorities during this upside down training phase.
It's pretty comprehensive.
It is. So we're going to get into each one, but just to give you a sneak peek, first we're going to look at how to improve posture by stretching those muscles that have gotten all tight and shortened. Then we're going to talk about how to improve posture by strengthening those muscles that are weak and imbalanced.
Yep. And then we'll move on to increasing core stability and strength, which is huge.
Huge. We'll touch on shoulder stability too, which is, especially important for anyone who, spends a lot of time at a desk or just like hunched over their phone.
Or lifting weights.
Or lifting weights. We can't forget that. All right, then we'll dive into how to improve your functional strength and conditioning using just your body weight, no fancy equipment needed. And then we'll cover some more advanced intensity techniques, like if you've got some stubborn body parts that just don't seem to want to grow.
Right, and those are the ones that can really make a difference in breaking through plateaus.
Totally. And then finally, we'll look at how to fine-tune your lifting technique so you're hitting the right muscles at the right angles. It's like a complete overhaul of your training approach.
It's a journey, for sure.
A lot.
A lot to unpack.
It is. So let's start with priority number 1. You ready for this?
Lay it on me.
Improving posture by stretching those shortened muscles. Now, for the first 7 days of this program, he's basically saying you got to stretch every single day. And he gives you this whole list of stretches to do.
Oh, yeah, he's very specific.
Very specific. So for the lower body, just to give you an idea, we're talking low back stretches, those lying ones. That letter T stretch, have you ever done that one? That's a good one for opening up the hips.
Yeah, love that one.
Then there's the kneeling hip flexor stretch. And oh my gosh, I think everyone can benefit from that. Who doesn't have tight hip flexors?
I know, right? Sitting is the new smoking.
It's true. And then you've got quad stretches, hamstring stretches, even stretches for your glutes and piriformis, which is a tiny little muscle in your hip that can cause a lot of problems.
It can, especially if you're having lower back pain.
Yeah, and then there's the double leg straddle stretch.
Oh, that's a good one.
I know, right? It stretches the inner thighs. Plus, a tensor fascia latae stretch, which is this band of tissue that runs along the outside of your thigh, and a calf stretch, too. He doesn't leave anything out.
It's a lot. But it makes sense when you think about all the things that can contribute to poor posture. We've got to address it all.
Totally. Now, for the upper body, there's the trapezius stretch, the chest stretch. You know the one where you put your arms up against a doorway or a wall? That's a classic. And then an anterior shoulder stretch, a back stretch. Oh, and there are even stretches for the quadratus lumborum. That's a muscle in your lower back and your lats, which are those big muscles in your back. Then there's a seated lateral stretch. And get this, even forearm stretches. Forearm stretches. Who knew?
I mean, it makes sense and everything is connected.
Right. Like, I never would have thought about stretching my forearms before. But he's right. Like, if your forearms are tight, that can actually affect your grip, your wrist mobility.
Absolutely. Your posture in general. It all plays a role.
Okay, so what I really like about this whole stretching section is that he doesn't just throw a bunch of random stretches at you and say, good luck.
Oh, no. There's a method to the madness.
Yes. He walks you through how to tailor your stretching based on your own specific postural needs, which is so smart because not everyone needs the same stretches, right?
Right. It's very individualized.
So, for example, if you notice you've got that, what do they call it? Anterior pelvic tilt,
Oh, yeah.
where your pelvis is kind of silting forward and you've got that like exaggerated curve in your lower back. He says you need to really focus on stretching your quads and your hip flexors, which makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Those muscles are usually tight when you've got an anterior pelvic tilt.
And then if you've got the opposite, like a posterior pelvic tilt where your pelvis is tucked under, then he says to really focus on stretching those hamstrings.
Yep. And he even talks about how your foot placement can give you clues about other muscle imbalances.
Right, the foot placement. So if your feet tend to turn outwards a little bit, that could mean your tensor fasciae latae and your IT band are tight. You know those muscles on the outside of your thigh.
And if your feet turn out a lot, then your adductors might be tight too, the ones on the inside of your thigh.
So basically he's saying pay attention to how you stand and how your body naturally wants to move. That can tell you a lot about which muscles need some extra TLC.
It's like a self-assessment before you even get into the real workout.
Exactly. And then if you're someone who struggles with overhead squats, you know, like if you can't get down low enough while keeping your back straight, then he says you need to work on your flexibility around your shoulders, hips, and ankles.
Yeah. And he specifically points out the hip flexors, quads, calves, chest, and shoulders as the usual suspects in that case.
Makes sense. Like you're using all those muscles when you squat. So pretty useful stuff. And he also emphasizes that if you're not seeing improvements from these stretches, or if you suspect something more serious is going on, like a nerve problem or a structural issue, then you need to go see a professional.
Oh, yeah, definitely. He specifically mentions chiropractors, art therapists, and massage therapists as good options.
Yep. So it's not just about DIYing everything. Sometimes you need some expert help.
Agreed.
Okay, so before we move on to strengthening those weaker muscles, which is coming up next, he does have some bonus stretching tips, which I actually think are pretty important.
Let's hear him.
All right, so first of all, he says that once you get into the habit of stretching every day, you should aim to incorporate it into your regular workouts. So whether you do it before or after lifting sessions or even on a separate day, just make sure you're getting it in.
Consistency is key.
Always. And this one's important. He says you gotta hold each stretch for at least a minute, preferably 2 or even 3 minutes if you can manage it, especially those areas that are really tight.
Oh, yeah. You got to give those muscles time to actually relax and lengthen. Holding for like 15 seconds just isn't going to cut it.
Nope. And he also emphasizes the importance of actually breathing during your stretches and creating a relaxed environment. Like no distractions, no TV, no phone, just you, your breath, and the stretch.
That's a good tip.
So yeah, stretching is important. We're not just glossing over it here. Are you ready to move on to priority number 2?
Hit me.
Strengthening those weaker muscles. And this is where things start to get really interesting because he basically throws a wrench into the whole traditional approach to weight training.
How so?
Well, he's basically saying no more bilateral exercises.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so those barbell squats and bench presses that everyone loves, not during this initial phase.
So what are we supposed to do? Just stand around and look at the weights?
Nope. Unilateral training is the name of the game here, so that means working one leg or one arm at a time.
Okay. And what's the reasoning behind that?
Well, the logic is pretty simple, actually. When you do bilateral exercises like a barbell squat, your stronger leg will almost always compensate for your weaker leg. You might not even realize it's happening.
So you're never really isolating the weaker side.
Exactly. And this can actually make your muscle imbalances worse over time.
Oh, wow. So you're just perpetuating the problem.
Exactly. So by forcing each limb to work independently, you can really target those weaknesses and start to even things out.
Makes sense.
Now, he does give you this rule to follow, which he calls Ian King's weak side rule, which I thought was a pretty cool name for a rule.
Etchy, right.
So the first part of this rule is to always train your weaker or injured side first.
Okay, so you're essentially leading with your weakness.
Yep. And then on the flip side, you always stretch your tighter side first.
So it's all about prioritizing those areas that need the most attention.
Exactly. Now, the second part of the rule is that you should never do more reps or lift more weight on your stronger side than you did on your weaker side.
So if your left leg can only do 8 reps of a lunge, then your right leg only gets to do 8 reps too, even if it feels like it could do more.
That's right, and you shouldn't hold a stretch on your more flexible side longer than you held it on your tighter side. It's all about bringing up the lagging side, not pushing the stronger side even further ahead.
It's about balance.
Balance, yeah, it's a good word for it. And he also emphasizes that when you're doing these exercises, you've got to go through a full range of motion. Don't be afraid to really move those joints. That's where you're going to get the most muscle fiber stimulation.
Yeah, and you might even discover muscles you didn't know you had.
Right, it's like a whole new world of muscles waiting to be activated. All right, so let's get into some actual exercises. For this phase, he mainly recommends using bands and tubing for both upper and lower body strengthening.
Okay, so no heavy weights just yet.
Not in this initial phase. It's all about control and stability, remember. So for upper body, he suggests things like standing rows with resistance bands, lat pull downs using bands, lateral raises with tubing, and reverse flies with tubing.
Okay, good choices. Those are all exercises that you can really focus on each individual muscle.
Exactly. And for lower body, he recommends hip abduction exercises with a band, single leg kickbacks, single leg hip extensions, and alternating supermans.
So we're still sticking to that unilateral approach, working one leg at a time.
Always. And just like with the stretching, he gives you some guidance on how to tailor your strengthening program based on those common postural issues. So if you've got that anterior pelvic tilt where your pelvis is tipped forward, he recommends focusing on strengthening your abs.
That makes sense.
Right, it helps to pull the pelvis back into a more neutral position. And if you've got a posterior pelvic tilt where your pelvis is tucked under, then he says to focus on strengthening your spinal erectors, those muscles along your lower back.
So we're basically targeting the opposing muscles to help correct the imbalance.
Precisely. And if you remember the foot placement thing we talked about?
Get the outward turning feet.
Well, he says if your feet turn out slightly, it could be a sign of weak glutes, especially that gluteus medius muscle. So you want to make sure you're working on strengthening those glutes.
Okay, and what about for those people whose feet turn out a lot?
Then he suggests focusing on both hip extensors, which are mainly your glutes, and your hip abductors, which are the muscles on the outside of your thighs. It's all about improving alignment and making sure everything's working in harmony.
It's fascinating how connected everything is, isn't it?
It is. It's like a giant puzzle, and we're trying to figure out how to put all the pieces together.
A very complex puzzle.
All right, so we've stretched our tight muscles, we've started to strengthen our weaker muscles. Now we're moving into days 14 to 21, which means it's time for priority number 3.
Bring it on.
Increasing core stability and strength.
Ah, yes. The core. The foundation of everything.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So this is what we finally start adding in some dedicated abdominal work, which I know a lot of people have been waiting for.
Yeah, who doesn't want a strong core?
Right, but he's very specific about why core work is so important at this stage. It's not just about getting those six-pack abs.
No, definitely not. It's much more functional than that.
Exactly. It's about stabilizing your pelvis, which is this central joint that basically affects your entire body.
Right, if your pelvis is out of whack, it can throw off your spine, your hips, your legs. Everything.
Totally. And he actually has this really simple test you can do to see if your core is weak.
Oh, yeah? Tell me about it.
Okay, so you lie on your back with your knees bent, feet flat on the floor, arms at your sides, and then you try to sit all the way up without using any momentum or letting your feet come off the ground.
Sounds deceptively simple.
It is, but it's actually harder than it looks. If you can't do it, it's a pretty good sign that your abs need some work.
Okay, I'm going to try this later. I'm curious now.
Yeah, let me know how it goes. And speaking of ab work, he gives you a specific program to follow, which includes things like air bike crunches, janda sit-ups, which are kind of like regular sit-ups, but you press your heels into the ground the whole time, full sit-ups, lying side crunches, supine double leg raises, alternating toe touches, and hip thrusts.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of ab exercises. My core is already burning just thinking about it.
I know, right? But here's the thing. He recommends doing them all as a circuit.
A circuit, so no rest in between exercises.
Yep. And you're supposed to keep a pretty quick tempo, too.
Okay, this is definitely a workout for the books.
Yeah. He does say you can start with just one set of 10 reps for each exercise and work your way up to 2 sets of 15. But even then, that's a lot of ab work. And he does say you should take a minute or two to rest between sets just to let your abs catch their breath.
Yeah, I'd imagine you need that.
He also recommends doing this ab circuit every single workout unless you're super sore. And the good news is that because you're not using any weights, you should recover pretty quickly. So, no excuses.
Got it.
All right, so we're officially halfway through this initial upside down training phase, and you know what that means. It's time for priority number 4.
Hit me.
Increasing shoulder stability.
Shoulder stability. That's a good one.
So he explains that this becomes important around the 21-day mark. By this point, you should have been stretching and strengthening consistently for a couple of weeks, so hopefully you're starting to feel some positive changes in your body.
I would hope so. All that stretching and core work.
Right. But now it's time to shift our focus to the shoulders, because a lot of people, especially those who spend a lot of time sitting, tend to have weak shoulder stabilizer muscles.
Oh, yeah. That's a common problem.
It is, and it can lead to that rounded shoulder look, where your shoulders kind of roll forward.
Internally rotated shoulders?
Exactly. And he says there's a really easy way to check if you have this issue. You just stand sideways in front of a mirror and see if you can see the top of your upper back.
Okay, I'm doing that right now. Oh, yeah. I can definitely see my upper back. So what does that mean?
Well, it's probably a sign that your shoulders are internally rotated. He also recommends checking your thumb position when you're standing in front of a mirror with your arms at your sides. If your thumbs are pointing straight ahead, you're good. If they're angled inward, you might have some mild internal rotation. And if your palms or thumbs are facing the wall behind you, then you've got a more serious issue.
So it's like a spectrum of shoulder rotation.
Exactly. And he says this problem often stems from doing too much chest work, like push-ups and bench presses, without doing enough pulling exercises or exercises that target the external rotators of the shoulders.
Okay, so we need to bring balance to the force.
Yes, and that's exactly what this shoulder stability priority is all about. So the focus here is on strengthening those external rotator muscles and the muscles that control your shoulder blades.
So lots of pulling and rotating movements.
Exactly. He recommends exercises like scapular retractions, so that's just squeezing your shoulder blades together. Then there's reverse flies with tubing or light dumbbells, external rotations with tubing or dumbbells, diagonal external rotations, and prone dumbbell reverse flies.
Okay, those all make sense.
Right, and he recommends doing them all as a circuit, just like with the ab exercises. But he emphasizes that you should use a slow, controlled tempo.
So it's not about speed here. It's about control and precision.
Exactly. He says the goal is to really switch on those rotator cuff muscles and the other external rotators so they can do their job of stabilizing your shoulders. And he even suggests doing this mini routine before every upper body workout, especially if you're going to be lifting heavy weights.
That's a good tip, like a little prehab for your shoulder.
Exactly. All right, so we're almost done with these priorities. Just 2 more to go. You ready for priority number 5?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this one is all about improving your functional strength and conditioning using body weight exercises.
Bodyweight training. Classic.
Classic. And he quotes this guy, Alwyn Cosgrove, who says, "You have no freaking business using a load if you can't stabilize, control, and move efficiently using only your body weight."
I like that quote. It's very straight to the point.
Right. And he's making a really important point. Body weight exercises are the foundation of all movement, and they should be a staple in everyone's routine.
No matter what your fitness level or goals are.
Exactly. And the best part is you can do this workout anywhere. No gym required.
Perfect for those who travel a lot or who are just intimidated by the gym environment.
Totally. So this bodyweight conditioning program includes a pretty wide range of exercises. We're talking push-ups, mountain climbers, burpees.
Ooh, burpees. Those are a killer.
Yeah. There are also high knee drills, bodyweight squats, close grip chin-ups, bench dips, modified pull-ups, which you can do with a band if you need help alternating split squat jumps, single leg hip extensions, bodyweight reverse lunges, single leg plank raises, and oblique adductor raises.
Wow. That's a lot of exercises.
It is, but he recommends doing them all as a circuit, just like the hip and shoulder routines. And the structure for this one is a little different. You're supposed to do as many reps as possible of each exercise for 30 seconds, then you rest for 20 seconds, and then you repeat that 3 times.
So it's a bit more of a high-intensity interval training approach?
Exactly. And he recommends using a stopwatch to keep track of the intervals.
So you can really focus on pushing yourself during those 30-second work periods.
Yeah, it's all about intensity here. He does say that if you're new to this type of training, you might need to modify some of the exercises or break the workout up into upper and lower body days.
Makes sense. You don't want to jump in too quickly and end up injured.
Exactly. So the key takeaway here is that you should really push yourself during those 30-second work periods. Try to get as many reps as you can while maintaining good form, of course. and expect to be breathing hard by the end of it.
It's a workout and a cardio session all rolled into one.
Totally. All right, we're making our way to the final two priorities now, which are all about refining your training and really targeting those stubborn areas. So priority number 6 is all about decreasing lagging body parts using advanced intensity techniques.
Ooh, this is where we get in the nitty-gritty.
Yes, so he introduces this concept called 1 in 12s, and he uses leg extensions as an example. Basically, you do a full rep, then you lower the weight halfway down, and then you come all the way back up. So you're basically squeezing in an extra half rep in the weakest part of the range of motion.
That sounds brutal.
It is, and it's designed to really overload those muscles that are lagging behind.
So you're forcing them to work harder even if they don't want to.
Exactly. And he also talks about 21s, which you've probably heard of before, but he recommends using them for pretty much every muscle group, not just biceps.
Yeah, I've usually only seen people do them for biceps.
Right, but he explains that his favorite way to do them is to do 7 half reps in the weakest range of motion, then 7 full reps, and then 7 half reps in the strongest range of motion.
So you're really hitting all parts of the movement.
Exactly. And he also talks about using slow tempos like 814 or 613.
Okay, so what do those numbers mean again? I always forget.
So for example, with an 814 tempo, you would lower the weight for 8 seconds, pause for 1 second at the bottom, and then lift the weight for 4 seconds.
So it's like a super slow and controlled movement.
Exactly. And the idea is that it forces you to really engage those muscles and work on your stability even when you're using lighter weights. He also makes a pretty interesting point about training smaller muscle groups before larger ones.
Okay, now that's something I haven't heard before.
Right. It's kind of counterintuitive because most people think you should always train the big muscles first, like your chest or your legs.
Yeah, that's the conventional wisdom.
But his argument is that by training your smaller muscles first, you're prioritizing those lagging body parts when you have the most energy.
That actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
It does, and he gives some examples like if your shoulder stabilizers and triceps are weak, it can affect your bench press. So by focusing on the smaller muscles first, you're actually setting yourself up for a better bench press.
So it's like you're working on the supporting cast before you get to the star of the show.
Exactly. And he says that during this upside-down training phase, you should be giving higher priority to smaller muscles like your forearms, traps, biceps, triceps, and calves, both in terms of the order you train them and how much volume you give up.
So it's like a complete rethinking of how we structure our workouts.
Pretty much. And then finally, we arrive at priority number 7, which is all about decreasing weak angles of a muscle by adjusting your training technique.
Okay, so this is getting even more specific.
It is. And he does mention that people with longer limbs might need to make some specific adjustments to their lifting technique, but he doesn't go into a lot of detail about that in this particular program.
Okay, so we'll have to save that conversation for another day.
We will, but he does give some general tips for various exercises. For example, with squats, he recommends going as low as possible, ideally butt to floor, if you can manage it.
So we're really working on that depth.
Yep. And he says you might want to experiment with a wider stance and pointing your toes out slightly. He also emphasizes that you should only go as low as you can while keeping your back flat.
So no rounding that lower back.
Nope. And if you have trouble getting low enough in a regular squat, he suggests trying front squats.
Good option for those who struggle with flexibility.
Exactly. And with the bench press, he says to keep your elbows tucked in closer to your body rather than flaring them out.
Yeah, that's a common mistake people make. It takes the emphasis off the chest and puts more stress on the shoulders.
Right. And for those with long arms, he suggests leaving a small gap between your chest and the bar at the bottom of the movement.
Okay, so we're really paying attention to the mechanics of the movement here.
We are. And with shoulder presses, he says to lower the dumbbells down past your ears. And if you have long arms, you might not need to go all the way up to full extension.
So it's all about finding the right range of motion for your body.
Exactly. And he gives some specific cues for isolation exercises like triceps extensions and biceps curls. Like with triceps extensions, you want to make sure you're locking out your elbow at the top.
And with biceps curls, you want to fully extend your arm at the bottom and keep those palms facing up the whole time.
Yep. And for compound pulling exercises like lat pull-downs, he says you should elevate your shoulder blades at the start and pull the bar down to your collarbone.
So it's not just about using your arms to pull the weight down.
Right. You're engaging those back muscles. And with seated rows, he says you should let your shoulder blades roll forward at the start and then pull the weight with your back, not just your arms.
Makes sense.
And even for exercises like hamstring curls, he has specific tips. He says you should bring your heels all the way to your glutes at the top and fully extend your legs at the bottom, keeping your toes pointed and your abs tight. And with calf raises, he says you should let your heels drop all the way down to the floor and then stand up as high as you can.
Wow, he's really thought of everything.
I know. And he emphasizes that before you start any of these exercises, you should always do a warm-up set with a very light weight to get a feel for the movement.
Yeah, that's crucial. You don't want to jump right into heavy weights without priming those muscles.
Exactly. And he also reminds you that you might need to start with lighter weights than usual when you're focusing on proper form and range of motion. But that's okay because it can actually help you activate muscles you've never really used before.
Yeah, it's like discovering a whole new layer of muscle.
Now, if you're feeling like this is a lot to take in, I totally get it. It is.
It's a lot.
But the good news is that he has a website, www.fitnessgenerator.com/getbuffed. And you can sign up for a free account, which will give you access to the complete program with all the exercises laid out for you, 3D animations to show you the proper form, notes on the program, workout tracking tools, and even printable workout sheets.
That's pretty awesome.
It is, and he says if you need to adjust the start date of the program, you can just send him an email. So he's really trying to make it as easy as possible to follow along.
Yeah, that's great.